Good morning, everybody. And yeah, thanks for taking time out of your day to be here. Um, so yeah, I just think it was amazing on Sunday hearing Pastor Jeff talk about reconciliation. Our God is the God of reconciliation, and the Bible is a book of reconciliation. And I'm really honored today to bring you a couple of really cool stories from Genesis, and one of them is all about reconciliation. Um, and so when we're talking about the stories or reading the passages today, I'd like you to see the reconciliation both between God and his people, and then on a more local level, the reconciliation between the two brothers. So first, I'd like to start with a little bit of background to the story thus far. So we're going to be reading in Genesis 32 and 33, but just to recap what we've seen so far. So we have the story of Jacob and Esau, and their relationship is truly a saga of sibling rivalry, deception, and eventually reconciliation. And this comes from the earliest days, right? Even when they were born as twins, the story begins with Jacob grasping Esau's heel at birth, which is a symbolic gesture hinting at their lifelong struggle for supremacy and blessing. And Jacob's name means heel holder or supplanter. And so that just foreshadows his, becoming someone that is going to surpass his brother. And Jacob himself, I think, had that desire as well, right? And it becomes evident when he convinces Esau to sell his birthright for a simple bowl of stew, exploiting Esau's hunger and impulsiveness. And that sets the stage for the tension and the conflict that defines their relationship. Geographically, their whole narrative unfolds in the land of Canaan, the promised territory to their forefathers. Canaan holds immense significance in ancient and Near Eastern history because it was positioned at the crossroads of trade routes connecting Egypt and Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean. Everything flowed through there. To the east of Canaan was desert, to the west was the sea, and so everything kind of flowed along that coastal area. And this context also shapes the dynamics between Jacob and Esau's relationship as they vie for control and inheritance within this region. And also speaks to the blessing that God gave to Abraham to put his people in this land through which all trade would flow. And so that, those people would see God's people as they were conducting their business in their lives. So from there, the pivotal moment occurs when Isaac nears death. Rebecca devises a plan to secure the blessing for Jacob, disguising him as Esau, giving him the food to give to Isaac. And this deception infuriates Esau, who vows revenge once her father passes away. And so this results in Jacob fleeing to his uncle Laban's house in Haran, taking him away from Canaan and towards, eventual personal transformation. And then during his time in Haran, Jacob himself faces deception from Laban, right? He marries Laban's daughters, Leah and Rachel. He becomes a father of 12 sons. And despite the challenges he encounters, though, Jacob's faithfulness to God and eventual reconciliation with Laban also serve as pivotal moments in his personal journey. So after all this, Jacob is directed by God to return to Canaan, the land of his birthright. But he has to confront his past and reconcile with Esau. So this journey symbolizes Jacob's spiritual and emotional growth, as well as his readiness to face the consequences of his actions and the role that God will have in his story. The encounter with Esau becomes a moment of truth for Jacob, where he must confront his fears, and he has to rely on nothing but the grace of God to be reconciled with his brother. When we started this journey through Genesis, or through the Old Testament, Pastor Jason told us that Hebrew stories are written in three layers, with the top, middle, and bottom, with the big picture of how God is at work, the middle of how God is redeeming a people for his name, and then the bottom, the individual narrative specifics. So I'd like you to kind of keep that in mind as well as we're looking at this passage and applying that framework. So just in general, I'll talk a little bit about Genesis 32 and 33 in case we run out of time, and then we'll go into reading together. So in Genesis 32, we find Jacob is preparing to meet his brother Esau, fearing retaliation for deceiving him years earlier. Esau, likely having heard that Jacob is returning, is coming to meet him with a militia of 400 men. And terrified, Jacob prays to God, reminding him of his promises. He sends gifts ahead of Esau to appease him, and Jacob wrestles with a mysterious figure who is often interpreted as the angel of God and is renamed Israel, meaning he struggles with God. And then in Genesis 33, we see Jacob sees Esau approaching with his 400 men. Jacob approaches Esau, bowing to him 7 times. And to Jacob's surprise, Esau warmly embraces Jacob, and they both weep. Esau inquires about Jacob's family and accepts Jacob's explanations. And Jacob insists on giving Esau gifts as a gesture of goodwill, which Esau eventually accepts. That was very important to the culture at the time. And Jacob then travels on to Shechem in Canaan, purchasing land and building an altar there, and which he names Elohe Israel, the God of Israel. So let's read together, and I'll be reading from the ESV. So starting in chapter 32, verse 1. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And just a quick side note, Mahanaim means 2 camps. And I was wondering, why did Jacob call this place 2 camps? And I was thinking it might be a reference to the fact that this was a place where his camp and God's camp were together. And so right from the start here, we kind of have this concept of reconciliation happening, right? Verse 3, and Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants, and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord, in order that I may find favor in your sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into 2 camps, thinking, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of the deeds and steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant, for with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. These he handed over to his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass on ahead of me, and put a space between drove and drove. He instructed the first, when Esau my brother meets you and asks you to whom do you belong, where are you going, and whose are these ahead of you, then you shall say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau, and moreover, he is behind us. He likewise instructed the second and third, and all who follow the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he thought, I may appease him with a present that goes ahead of me, and afterward I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. So we'll pause here, and I'll tell you what God's been leading me to share. So in this first passage, we see that the messengers come back to Jacob after going out to survey the situation, and their report is not reassuring. Jacob remembers Esau's desire for revenge, and he knows what kind of man Esau is, and so Jacob is right to be concerned about the worst case scenario. Now Jacob, he's got this huge family that he's got to look after, right? And he's quite anxious about this. And so you can just imagine the picture, Jacob looks at himself and what he's got. And he's got this wagon train of women, children, livestock, and here's Esau, who's a man of power with a militia that's coming with him. And so what can Jacob do? So in this moment of desperation, Jacob turns to prayer, reaching out to the God of his father Abraham. Jacob's prayer here is very straightforward and it's very simple. And interesting, it's one of the first in the Bible that's recorded in this way. And so Jacob basically says, God, remember the promise that you made about bringing me back safely? Remember you said you would bless us in the land of Canaan? And there's a problem in my way, and that problem's name is Esau, and he needs your help. And it's a very humble prayer. He's sincere, and he's leaning hard into his faith, believing in those promises. And so I think in this prayer of Jacob, we can find a model of that shows, humility, thankfulness, simplicity, explicitly leaning on God's word, with and two words that mean so much to Jacob and they mean so much to us, right? You said, and like that's just an amazing model that I think we can apply to our lives today as well. And it's powerful, and it's this prayer, even if it's the last thing that he does, it should be the first. Prayer should always be the first thing that we turn to. So we find that Jacob isn't just waiting for the miracle after he says prayer. He's also putting some practical things into place. So he sends Esau the generous gift, which is a very tangible way of winning over Esau's favor. And I don't know if Jacob thought that this was going to work, or if he thought he had nothing else to lose. And of course, like I said, this gift giving was part of the culture at the time in order to seek favor with the ones who wronged. So he put together his gift of livestock. And so the lesson here for us is also that prayer isn't just about talking to God and sitting back and waiting for things to happen. So Jacob sent Esau this gift, which, in some respects was a sacrifice to win his favor. But even if this gift was insignificant, because Jacob knew what kind of man was, he had to use the things that God had given him for God's purposes. And the same is true of us as well. So we have to do our part, however insignificant that might seem. And Jacob shows us that while we trust in God's help, we have to partner with God. God has given us resources, and it's those things that we have. When we put them in God's hands and we give them up to God, that creates the ability to make miracles. Also, there's some interesting wisdom from the desert here. So there was a story of a man who lost his camel and said to his master, "I've left my camel free and trusted in God's providence." And his master said to him, "You should have tied your camel first and then trusted in God's providence." So here's a reflection question. How do you relate to the story of Jacob's experience of fear and anxiety when facing a challenging situation? What do you do? We can talk about that afterwards. So moving on to verse 22. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, across the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What's your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. And so here we have a remarkable story of Jacob wrestling with the angel and prevailing. So like I said before, some people interpret this as an angel of God. Some people interpret it as God himself. In either case, what's important is that God's name was with this being. So what does Jacob do? Very early in the morning, he sends his wives and his children over the river so he can, likely be in private and reflect on what's going to happen. And so it's also debated whether this encounter was a physical encounter or whether it was a vision. In any case, what transpired was supernatural because Jacob was transformed both spiritually and physically by this incident. So this was a case of single combat. That's what was happening here. It was hand to hand. It was a close, intimate encounter. Jacob was so full of worry that in some respects, God himself seemed to come against him as an enemy to oppose his entrance into the land of promise, not allowing him to follow his wives and children. But God wasn't there to oppose him. God wanted to bless him. We are told by the prophet in Hosea that how Jacob wrestled. He wept, he made supplications, and prayers and tears were his weapons. And this was not only physical, but a spiritual wrestling. In the same way, we too today, all of us who pray, in praying, we still, in a sense, wrestle with God. And what was the result of this struggle? The result was that Jacob kept his ground. The struggle went long. The angel did not prevail against him. And it was not in his own strength that he wrestled, nor by his own strength that he prevailed, but in and by the grace of God. had this angel of God wanted to, he could have crushed Jacob. But God will put strength in us, and by that strength, Jacob prevailed. He had the strength to hold on through the struggle even until daybreak. And it is impossible for us to prevail against God, but in His own strength. It is His Spirit that intercedes in us and helps us through our weakness. As Paul later writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 10, when I am weak, then I am strong. Another thing here, the angel put out Jacob's thigh with just a touch to show him what he could do and the power that he was wrestling with. The Bible doesn't contain any kind of record of Jacob calling out in pain in this case. So this was a very divine kind of a touch where God injured Jacob and healed him at exactly the same moment. Next, God puts a mark of honor on Jacob by changing his name. The angel asks, what is your name? And Jacob answers, Jacob, the name that means supplanter that he was carrying his entire life. The angel says, not anymore. From now on, you're going to be celebrated for your struggle and the victory I've given you. You will be Israel, a name that commonly means God prevails. So why does this happen? I think this is so fascinating, this story. God is the Most High. There's no way that any man could defeat him, even if he was in a physical form. He is supreme, he's almighty, he is God, but God is also sovereign. Nothing happens except for God. There is a hint in what comes next. Jacob gives a new name to that place. He calls it Peniel, the face of God, because there he saw the appearance of God and obtained the favor of God. Interesting to note that the name he gave to that place does not call attention to his victory over God. Jacob understood that his victory was only by God's grace. He's not saying that he prevailed over God, but he wrestled in God and his life was spared. I'm reminded of Romans 9:21, where Paul writes, he is the potter and we are the clay. So Jacob rightly noted that his victory was and will be by God's grace. And to us, it is highly, highly instructive, showing that to encourage us to meet the trials to which we are subjected with our heads held high, God lends us his power and grace, which combined with our faith and prayers unlock our victory. Another interesting note here, the Bible never says that Jacob was healed of his hip limp. And I think this is instructive for us as well. Jacob carried the scar of this exchange with God throughout the rest of his life. As I was reflecting on this, I wondered to myself why that would be the case. As I just mentioned, this was a case where God allowed Jacob to prevail, but the victory was not without some sacrifice. I believe that God struck Jacob and never healed him, and he had this limp so that he would always remember who it was that was responsible for his reconciliation with Esau, who it was that, came to him and impacted his life. It was a constant reminder that nothing that Jacob accomplished was of his own accord. All was a result of God's grace. In another sense, it was a humbling reminder that all Jacob received was from God. So here again, it reminds me of when Paul is speaking of the marks of Jesus and the thorn in his flesh that he received. Jacob here as well had no reason to think that this was a disgrace to bear in his body the marks of the Lord, but it was to be like Paul's thorn in the flesh, something to keep him humble. And so here's my second reflection question. When was the time when you felt like you were wrestling with God or facing a difficult situation? Or how did you handle it? Moving on to Genesis 33 and the story of reconciliation between Jacob and Esau. Maybe we'll just read a portion of this chapter. We'll see how far we get. Again, I'll read from the ESV. So verse 1. And Jacob lifted up his eyes, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided his children among Leah and Rachel and the two female servants. And he put servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, Who are these with you? Jacob said, The children whom God has graciously given your servant. Then the servants drew near, they and the children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down, and last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, What do you mean by all this company that I met? Jacob answered, To find favor in the sight of my Lord. But Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. Jacob said, No, please. If I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. Thus he urged him, and he took it. Verse 12, then Esau said, let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail and the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me and the pace of the children until I come to my Lord and Seir. For the sake of time, I'll get the next few verses and wrap up verse 20. Verse 19. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. So here again, what an amazing story of reconciliation. Reading this, we can easily be reminded of the story of the prodigal son, because it's a case of God supernaturally softening the heart of Esau towards his brother. Esau, who could have continued to harbor the ill feelings toward Jacob for all his wrongs, instead runs to meet him, and this results in both weeping and joy. Note that Jacob lifted his eyes. So Jacob was transformed by that encounter with God that he had early in the morning. He was ready to face Esau with his head held high, and he knew that God was with him. But he wasn't prideful. Note the irony also and the humility that Jacob shows. He bows 7 times before his brothers. And this was exactly the type of display of honor that Jacob stole from Esau in the form of his blessing. Isaac literally said that his mother's brothers would bow to him, but Jacob had to bow first. This is truly a supernatural turn of events. So earlier in Genesis, we read that Esau had vowed to kill Jacob. Imagine the scene playing out here. Esau had his militia of 400 men, and Jacob had his wagon train of women, children, and livestock. According to his blessing, Jacob was to rule over Esau, but in any physical confrontation between them, Esau would have prevailed. But Esau is now overjoyed at their reconciliation. Esau didn't even want to take the gifts that Jacob was offering, and he wonders, why are you sending me all these people ahead of you? What is this all about? I just think it's an amazing story, an amazing change of heart that only God could make happen. And Esau knows that according to the culture, these are things that he should be accepting. But he says, no, it's all for you. Keep it. I don't need any of this. Jacob has to repeatedly ask Esau to accept these gifts, not because Esau needed them, but because it was important in the culture. It was important for the superior party, the wronged party, to accept the gifts that were offered. This was a proof of reconciliation both to Jacob and to any others that were witnessing this exchange. This was to show that there was no more animosity between the two houses of Esau and Jacob, and that the reconciliation was complete. So after this, the two of them parted ways amicably. Actually, even before that, it's very interesting in how Jacob laid out his camp, right, as they were approaching Esau. Although trusting God, practically he put things rightly in order. He put his servants first, Leah and her children, and then Rachel and Jacob at the back. The things that he had the most value for, he kept them in the rear. So even then, he was taking those practical steps to make sure that that he was partnering with God in that way. So after this reconciliation, the two of them, they part ways amicably. So in a society where blood feuds and vendettas were common, parting ways peacefully was truly remarkable. This story demonstrates God's glory in reconciling Jacob and Esau, and God's desire for harmony over past grievances. And more than anything, it's God's ability to keep his promises despite our limited understanding. The story shows us God's desire for reconciliation, a reconciliation through which he would be glorified and his name would be made great, and would lead directly to his will taking place in the place that he called his people. I think for us today, this kind of reconciliation is something that we should still be looking to as an example. If we in the church, there's many things that we can often disagree with, and that's just life. If we harbor those feelings of resentment and disagreement, what value is there for us, and what value is there for the people that look at us, right? We want to be able to reconcile with each other. Let not the sun go down on your anger. Come to your brother, come to your sister, reconcile, and let God's glory shine in that reconciliation. And so my final reflection question: in what ways can you apply the lessons of trust, reconciliation, and transformation from Jacob's story to your own journey of faith? And that's all I have for you. Thank you for listening. I hope that you guys got something out of that.
One to the two and two to the three. Let the world see the Holy Trinity.
Up early in the morning, Heartstrong family, faithfully talking with the Almighty. He walks with me through storms and tears. My doubt